Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Ask robtrek, where I try to answer your questions from the comment sections of my videos. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave them down in the comments below, and I'll do my best to answer them. And today I only really had time for one question because it took a little longer than I thought. But this one is from Larry Hayes, and he asks, Rob, any possibility you could do a video explaining the EM1D A2 settings? These settings have me thoroughly confused, and it's totally understandable. It's because our cameras are so customizable. You have to deep dive and do so many different things to really get a feel for what each one does. And I'll do my best to explain them. Now, I don't have an EM1 Mark III, so I will show you on an EM1X that I borrowed from a friend of mine. Thank you so much, David. And also, I'm going to have to show you something on my OM1 as well, because the EM1X actually is missing a feature that the EM1 Mark III has and the OM1. All right, let's go into the custom menu and go into the autofocus menu A2. So mode settings is just a way for you to select all the different targeting modes that you want to use or not use, for example. So right now we have everything checked, right? So let me go back to the control panel. And if we go in here and select our target points, right now I have all selected. And if you look in the bottom left, it'll tell you which focusing mode or target mode you've selected. And I can select a single, I can select a single point, I can select, cross point, 3x3, a 5x5, and then here I have C1, which isn't set, so it just goes to this small point, C2, C3, C4, and then back to all point. But let's say, for example, I only really use the first four here. I can turn off everything else. And then, now when I go in to select my control points, or focus points, you can see there's small, there's single, there's the cross, 3x3, and then back to all. So we skipped over the 5x5 and all the C1s and C2s. All right, let's go back into the menu and go to AF area pointer. And we have three choices here. We have off, we have on 1, that's the default setting, and then we have on 2. So let's start with the default setting. Now, when I go back out to my live view, you can see in the center there the target point reticle. And if I have pressed the shutter button, the AF area pointer pops up just briefly when I have pressed the shutter button to let us know that we've acquired focus on that point. And then we can look at the green circle in the top right to also confirm that we've locked autofocus. However, it's not very useful in this small point type target point. If we change our target area to something much wider, let's just do all points. Now when I have pressed the shutter button, the AF area pointer makes a little more sense now, right? Because now the camera is showing you where in the frame it's focusing. And it's not necessarily in the center, right? Now this behavior changes a little bit when we go into a different focusing mode. So let's go into CAF. Now just as before, when I have pressed the shutter button, it's going to show me where it's focusing, but we're in continuous AF and I'm half pressing the shutter button this whole time now. And if I move my camera to another area here, clearly it's focusing on the front of this lens now, or I can go over here to my other camera and you can see it's focusing on this camera, but the AF target area is not showing us where the camera is focusing, even though it is changing focus. And that's where the on to kind of comes in handy. So let's go back into the menu and turn the AF area pointer to on to. Now in continuous autofocus, as I have pressed the shutter button, now it's showing me all the areas that it's focusing on. And as I move the camera around while I'm half pressing the shutter button, it's showing me where the camera is going to focus. So let me go all the way over here. So this is where the on to setting comes in handy. All right, let's go back into the menu and I'll come back to AF targeting pad. On the M1 Mark III and other cameras, it's actually in menu A3, I think, but I'll come back to that. It's grayed out right now because I'm hooked up to an HDMI cable. So let's talk about the set home. Set home is basically a way for you to set up your own default settings for the AF targeting mode, targeting area, and targeting point. So if I click on this one, you can see we can set our default targeting mode to anything we want here. So let's say we want our default targeting mode to be SAF or single AF. And we can go in and we can say we want the single point to be our default setting for targeting mode. And then the targeting point, we can have in the center, or we can move it to anywhere we want. Let's say we want it in the lower left thirds for some reason. So these are all the default settings, and you can activate or deactivate these to force the camera to go back to all three, or these two, or just the one. But let's select all three. All right, now to quickly jump to the custom home point that we just set up, you need to push the home point button on your camera. And by default on the EM1X and the EM1 Mark III, you just click the joystick front and center. So if I click on the joystick, it's going to jump to the home point that we created. And if I click it again, it's going to toggle back to the last focusing target points, etc. that we used. So I can just toggle back and forth very quickly between all points and the home point. You can also program a button to be the home point. So if we go to the button menu, you can see that the joystick now center button is default home point, but we can go into button function, go to ISO for example, and change this to be the home point button. There it is. So now the ISO button is programmed to home point. So if you don't have a joystick on your camera, you can assign a button to be the home point. All right, let's go back to the menu and go to the next thing in the A2 menu, and that's the select screen settings. And basically this is simply how you want to move the target points around or change the face detect, etc. So right now the front dial is assigned to changing the focusing mode. The rear dial is set to change the face detect mode. And then the D-pad, if you push up and down, will move the position of the target point, and then left and right will move the position of the target point. And of course, you can change these to be other things. And you can set up two custom ways to do this on the M1 Mark II. I'm sorry, on the M1X. Same thing here. In this case, they just flipped what the dials do and the D-pad does. And to switch between set 1 and set 2, you go into the control panel, go into the AF target area box here, and then you click the info button. Now look at the left side. See how we change from D-pad to dials, back to D-pad. So just clicking the info button kind of just swaps out the functions or whatever we set up in the set 1 and set 2. All right, let's look at the next line item here, target mode settings. So this is a way for you to set up your own custom target modes. So if we click on this one, the defaults are all 1 by 1. Let's click over to the right, and we have two settings here, size and step. So size, basically you rotate the front and rear dials to set the size. So I can set up one that's just a wide horizontal one, or I can go back and set up a vertical, or I can additively add these so that, you know, it's almost the same as all points, but not quite, right? Or I can set up an area like this. And I guess this makes sense in certain scenarios. So let's set up just a simple line like this, a simple horizontal line. And then from here, we can set where we want the focus point that we just created to be able to move within the entire frame. So if I rotate the front and rear dials, like the front dial in this case, I can have it limited to just these areas within the frame. Now on a horizontal type focusing point that we created, this is not going to make any difference. It's going to be able to slide up and down this axis here. But if I change it to this, let's say I narrow it down to just these three. Now let's go back out, and we need to go back and turn on custom one, like so that it's available to us. Now we go into the super control panel, click on the AF target areas, and just rotate our front dial until we get to C1. So there's C1, and you can see we can move it up and down just in those three steps that we set. And it's a little bit off center, so we just use the D-pad to move it over left and right, like that if we want to. But that's basically what that does. And just to show you, if I go in here and change the step to just the verticals, oops, let me do it this way. If I go back into the target area, you can see it didn't make any difference because now this horizontal line, it can still just slide up and down these axes. But let's look at another scenario. Let's set up something a little smaller like this, a 3x1, and then set our step to a 3x3. Now if I go in here, you can see I can move it on this axis just along those 3 points, and that's it. So you need to have a focus area smaller than the steps that you set, basically, for that to make any sense. And then of course you can do that for every, you can program 4 different custom settings or custom focus points that you want here. Just don't forget to go back in to your mode setting. All right, then last but not least is the orientation link. And this basically allows us to change the AF targeting point and AF targeting mode depending on how we're holding the camera. So let's go ahead and turn these both on and go back out. So we can hold our camera straight like this horizontally, or we can rotate it to my left where the grip is on top, or we can rotate it to the right where the grip is on the bottom. And by doing so, we can change the AF targeting mode and the AF targeting point by simply rotating the camera. Now to set the different orientation AF targeting points and areas, we actually have to go back to the Set Home menu, click OK on this, and go into AF targeting mode. Now you can see there's a little right arrow to the right that we can click over, and we can change depending on the orientation. So this is our normal horizontal mode, and you can tell by the icon on the left. This is if we have the grip facing at the top of the camera when we're holding it vertically. Let's just change this to 3 point for demonstrations. I'm sorry, cross point. And then when we hold the camera the other way, we'll change this to, let's say, our C1 mode. All right, and then let's go to AF targeting point, and we can change it horizontally. Its default settings for our home point, which is fine. But our AF targeting point, when we're holding it to the, with the grip on the top, right? Let's move this up over a little bit to more of the top of the frame in this case. And then when we're holding the camera with the grip bottom, let's move this down 1 step here. Okay, now I'm holding the camera horizontally and we have our home point there. But if I rotate the camera so that the grip is on top, you can see we switched to our cross point that was closer to the top of the frame. Rotate it back horizontally, we're back to our home point, and then rotate it so that the grip is on the bottom, and now we're using our custom point. All right, now let's talk about the AF targeting pad. It's right here, and let's turn this on. And basically what this allows you to do is while you have your eye up to the EVF, you can use your thumb to move the focus point around. So I'm going to simulate that by putting my finger over the EVF, and now I can move the focus point around by moving my thumb in this little area here. So see where the focus point is now? And if I move it over like this, you can see it's moved over to the left side, and then I can move it over to the right side. And it moves it in very small increments. So by swiping repeatedly, you can get the focus point to move to the other side. But one little swipe just kind of moves it just 1 step, right? Or just a little bit. So you have to kind of repeatedly swipe it. So it's something you'll have to try for yourself and see if this works for you. All right, now on the M1 Mark III, they have an additional setting in that A2 menu called the loop setting. And I don't have an M1 Mark III, but I'll show you on my OM1. It's basically the same thing. We'll go into the AF menu, and on the OM1, it's on page 5, loop settings. So we click OK here, and we can do loop selection, and we have loop 1 and loop 2. So loop 1, basically, as you're moving, say, a single point across the screen, it'll come out the other side in the same position. Loop 2 is basically, if we move the focus point over to the right, it'll come out on the other side, but on the next row, and so forth. So just to quickly demonstrate this, we're on loop 1. So as I move this focus point around, you can see it stays on the same line, like so. If I change this to loop 2, you'll see that it moves to the next row every time we get to the other side of the screen. And then vertically, it does the same thing. It moves over. And then I think there was what? There was one more setting there, right? Let's see. Oh, okay. So if we turn this to yes, it's going to change to all focus points before it goes to the next, to the other side of the screen or to the next row. So let me move this focus point around back to the center. So when we get near the edge, before we go to the edge, it'll select all points. And then if we keep moving, it'll go back to a single point or small area, whatever we had it set to. So as you can see, there's virtually an infinite number of ways to customize the autofocusing points and target areas on our cameras. And most of these features are available on the EM1 Mark II, Mark III, the OM1, and the EM1X. It's just the menu placements might be a little bit different, might be on A2 or A3, depending on which camera you have, or on the OM1, it's not even labeled that way anymore, right? So that's all I have for today. Thank you so much for watching, and if you find these videos helpful, consider buying me a coffee or making a small donation in the links below, because they help me to continue making videos like this for you, and they are greatly appreciated. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.